Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells, and I write horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and I review games on the internet. Today, I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite games. When I started this review series, uh, I said that I have three RPGs that are my very, very favorite. They are the top, like, holy trinity of role-playing games for me. And I say that with firm in the knowledge that they change fairly regularly. But right now, it is Star Trek Adventures, The One Ring, and this one, Pendragon. I was introduced to Pendragon by my friend Alan Barr, who runs Gallant Knight Games, and will absolutely be reviewing some Gallant Knight games later on. My hard copy of this is from a previous edition. The PDF that we're going to be looking at is edition 5.2. None of this kind of whole number nonsense. We get all the way down into the points. 5 point, and the additions are meaningfully different. They streamline a lot of things. They change a few things. It's a game that's in constant flux. Anyway, um, this Pendragon is, as you can guess from the name, and because it says King Arthur on there, it is an Arthurian round table role playing game, and it is designed so that you can make your own knight, you can um, tell your own stories, or there is a campaign book that follows through. And here, what I love about this is the campaign book, and we'll be looking at this later in the year. But just so you can see them side by side, the Great Pendragon campaign is twice as thick as the core book is. Um, it's amazing. And the reason that the campaign is so big and the reason the campaign is so awesome is, first of all, it goes through like the entire Arthurian story, starting when Uther is king, before Arthur is even conceived, and then eventually up. You go through the boy king period, you go through all of this other stuff, all the way through to the fall of Camelot when Arthur is an old man. And because of that, as that might suggest, it's a very long story. And the game is designed to be played in a year by year adventure system. So whether or not you're doing the Great Pendragon campaign, each adventure will be about 1 year. Sometimes you can do like 2 adventures in a year or whatever, and then it's over. And an adventure will be ideally 1, maybe 2 sessions. And so then fairly regularly, time will be advancing. When we ran our campaign, we didn't make through the entire Great Pendragon campaign because life got in the way and it's 80 years long. But every more or less every session we would have our adventure, something would happen, and then we would move on to what's called the winter phase. And the winter phase, your character gets older, your character has a manor that they need to maintain and upgrade, and also your character can get married, your character can have children. And as time goes on, the intention, assuming you survive the fairly brutal combat system, is that you'll eventually fall in battle or die in some other way, and then your children will take over, and then your next character will be your child, or maybe your brother if you died before your kid was old enough. And so you're really, over the course of a Pendragon campaign, you're not so much playing a character as you are playing a family. And it's just beautiful the way that the system is constructed and the way that the campaign is built. I cannot express how cool this game is and how much I love it. But we're going to try. So we're going to start with looking at, I want to check out a couple of things in here. So let's show you the big PDF to give you a sense of kind of what this is like and the way that what it means when I say you're playing a family. We're going to look at an aspect of character generation. This game sort of has a life path system, but it's not a life path system for you. It's a life path system for your grandfather and your father, which is actually a good time to point out that the default state for this game is that you are a knight. That is the only class available to you. There are no other character types that you can play. Um, and the game kind of assumes that you will be a dude. And that's not entirely true. To their credit, the back of the book contains character sheets for both men and women. You can have women who are knights. When we did our campaign, we had my daughter played with us, and she was a knight, just like anyone else. You have to kind of hand wave a few things because the time period was very, very masculine and very male centric, and so you just play a more enlightened version of the actual legends of King Arthur, and then you're good to go. So if I keep defaulting to male pronouns while I'm explaining this and talking about your father and your grandfather, that's why. You absolutely can play it with women, but a lot of it kind of is designed for male knights all working together. Anyway, let's move on. So the family and fatherland section here, like I said, is essentially a life path system for your heritage. Not for you, but for where you came from. And so the game assumes that you're going to be playing in a very specific time. Like I said, kind of starting right around when Uther was king, which is why it's called Pendragon. And so it goes back then a few decades and says, well, starting in the year 439, what was your grandfather doing? And so you kind of go, and for every year you will roll a die. And maybe your grandfather just straight up died in that year, or maybe he fought in this Battle of Carlion. And if he fought in the Battle of Carlion, then you're going to roll another d20 and find out what happened. And maybe your family gained like an intense hatred of something. What does it say here? Died gloriously in battle, so you get 1,000 glory. End personal history for this ancestor, but roll for passion. And then on the next thing it will say, oh, you might have a passion where you hate the Irish because you fought in this Battle of Carlion. And so it goes on like that year by year. All of these, some of the years are fairly boring. You just patrolled and everything was fine. And some of them are big. There was a huge battle that your grandfather or your father may have participated in. If at any point your grandfather dies, then you just leap ahead to whenever it is that your father takes over. And different things will happen, and you'll go through year by year, and all the glory that you gain and the passions that your family has will carry on through successive generations. So if your grandfather fought in that battle and gained 1,000 extra glory, then some of that will trickle down to you, and you'll be at like a slightly higher glory level than maybe another knight of your same age, because you can say, my grandfather fought in the Battle of Carlion. And you can also say, I hate the Irish because my grandfather died in the Battle of Carlion, And so it's a really neat system that goes on. All the way up through Vortigern and all these other things. And then we get to, where's the last year? Year 485 is when you start. And we started in 439. So that's not quite 50 full years of history that you're figuring out for where your character came from. And so you don't really need a life path because you become a knight when you're around 18 years old, 18, 19, 20. Your previous thing, it doesn't matter where you came from. You were a poor little kid, and then you were a squire, and now you're a knight. And so the important part of your character's backstory is who your family was. And now let's take a look at the character sheet, because, and this is the really fancy one, there's printable ones as well. Page 2 of the character sheet has a giant character history. And let me stress, this is not big enough. When we played, we ended up with extra pages and sheets of paper, because every year you're going to be recording the important things that happened to you, how much glory you got, and then that also will trickle down to your son or your daughter, whoever takes over your legacy when your character finally dies in glorious battle. So anyway, let's have a look at the character sheet. So, like I said, the only thing you can do is knight. This is a special character sheet that's form fillable, and some of it's already sort of filled in. The game assumes, core book only, that you will be from Salisbury and that you will be Cymric, which is, a specific ethnicity. There are other books. One of the very first purchases I recommend you get is called the Book of Knights and Ladies, that expands it so you can have characters from all over the place. You can be from Aquitaine, you can be from um, the mainland, you can be German, you can be Spanish, you can be Muslim from down in the Middle East. There were at least two knights of the Round Table in classic Arthurian literature that were African or Middle Eastern, and so they are drawing from all over the area, kind of down through the Mediterranean, and so there's a lot of different options. But core book, you're from Salisbury and you're Cymric, and your lord is Roderick. Now, before I get into the personality traits, which is the part of this game that blew my mind right out of my head, let's look at the passions, just because that's a good excuse for us to talk about the way the dice work. This is a roll under system with a d20, and you just roll a single d20, and you're trying to hit that, but you're trying to get the highest thing you can without going over. So let's say down here, your passions, these are things that are important to you. And in general, across all of this, you can see that there's a handful of physical things up here: size, dexterity, strength, constitution, and appearance. Almost everything else is based more on your personality and your morals and things like that. And so your passions, right here, you have fealty to your lord, homage to your liege, love of your family, hospitality, honor, and everyone starts hating the Saxons because they're invading and trying to kill everyone. So let's look at fealty lord, and that's at a 15, which is fairly high, right? 75% chance on a normal d20 with no modifiers. What that means is when you are going to take an action, if that action would require you to be disloyal to your lord, then the game master can say, roll on that, and then you roll your dice, and if it is lower than a 15, you have succeeded in your fealty lord check, and you have to do what your lord says. You can not like it, but you have to do it. This sounds a little railroady, but it's not, because these passions can fluctuate as time goes by. And in a case like that, where you are forced against your will, your character doesn't want to do it, but you're like, I'm too loyal, I'm gonna do what he told me to do anyway. Then that might lower your fealty. Okay, or you might gain an extra passion that is distrust of your lord, things like that. And so you're trying to kind of really get into that mindset of an honor-driven knight. And you've got honor 15. If you would do something dishonorable, you got to roll, and then your game master can say, well, you succeeded at your honor check. You need to be honorable here, and then you can talk about it and see if there's a way around it, or if you're going to take a penalty, if your honor is just going to drop, things like that. And the way the dice work, the reason I said you want to roll as high as you can while still rolling under, if you hit a 1, which is the lowest possible, that's a critical fail, a critical miss. This game does have critical failures. And so, everyone kind of knows what a critical miss is when on a ranged attack, right? Like your bowstring breaks. That's kind of the go-to for a critical fail. What does a critical fail of honor look like? What does a critical fail of hospitality look like? And this is a wonderful chance for your game master to say, okay, you made you made an honor roll, you failed critically, you rolled a 1 on your honor. What are you going to do? And then you as a player have to decide, well, what am I going to do? How am I going to reflect this critical fail of honor? And that can provide some really cool storytelling and some really great character development. And it's really awesome role playing. So, but if you get the number itself, the target number, which in this case of honor is 15, then that is a critical success. You have successfully critted, and then first of all, you're going to check this little box, which means I was super good at honor, and it might go up when we get to the winter phase, and then you'd have an honor of 16. It also means that you get to describe, you get to narrate, what does a critical success of honor look like, and so on for all of these other things. Okay? When you get into combat, we look over here at the, here we go, the weapon skills. Everyone starts with sword skill of 10, but during character creation that might go up a few points, and definitely over time it is likely to go up. So let's say that you start as just a basic nobody, you didn't put any other points into sword, and so you're fighting with a sword. You have a 10, and your opponent has, let's say he's way better than you, he has a 13. Okay? So you roll the dice, and if you both roll under your own skill, you both succeed. But if you roll higher than him, you succeed better. Right? You beat him, even though you both successfully did something. And the game has some extra rules in there about how parrying works and about how weapons can break depending on who succeeds how. But that's how the opposed rolls work. And so if you roll a 9, that's under your 10, you succeeded. If your opponent rolls a 12, that's under his 13, he succeeded and he's higher than you. If he only rolled an 8, even though his skill is better, you rolled higher than him, you both succeeded, so you did better. If he rolls a 12 and you roll a 10, then you crit and you win regardless because you crit and you're amazing. So that's how the dice work. Now, let's talk about the personality traits. This is, for all the other wonderful things about this game that I adore, there is nothing that compares with the personality traits. This is the most innovative character system that I think I've ever seen. And what it is these are, as you can see, kind of standard, what do I want to call them? Like moral things. They're personality attributes, but they're in pairs. So chaste and lustful, energetic and lazy, forgiving and vengeful, and so on. And what makes it work? Oh, someone in the chat says virtues and vices. That's a fantastic way of looking at this. And what makes this so wonderful is that, and you can see from the way they're filled in, they will always add up the two sides to 20. So as you become more forgiving, you become less vengeful. As you become more deceitful, you become less honest, and so on. They will always, when one advances, the other one shrinks, and vice versa. So those two pairs will always go up. What I love about this, if you hand somebody a character sheet for, say, Dungeons and Dragons, and they've never played before, if they've never even played a role-playing game at all before, they can look at that and not really know what to do with it. And they can say, well, my strength is a 14 and my dexterity is a 12, so I know that I'm slightly stronger than I am agile, but that doesn't really tell them much about how to play or about who the character is. You can hand a Pendragon character sheet to someone who's never played Pendragon, to someone who's never played a role-playing game ever, and they can look at these personality traits and go, oh, okay, my modesty's 13, but my pride is 7, so I know I'm a fairly modest person. And these, again, are very basic stats, and during character creation, some of them are going to go up quite a bit. And, you'll have one that is like your signature trait that you are known for. You are the most prudent or the most spiritual or the most cowardly person in all the land. And so that one's going to be very high. And so you can look at this and go, oh, okay, I have a really great sense of who this knight is and how I'm going to play them. The other thing you can see up here at the top of the traits section, there's a chivalry bonus and a religion bonus, and each of those are related to certain things. So chivalry has a little asterisk, and you look at the asterisk. That is energetic, generous, just, merciful, honest, and valorous. Those are the chivalry traits, the ones that relate to chivalry. And if all of those traits add up to at least 96, then you gain a chivalry bonus, which, if I remember correctly, is like damage reduction. And then same with religion. The religious attributes are chaste, energetic, generous, modest, temperate. And again, those are for this core British Christian religion. Once you start adding in other source books, you can end up with a character who is Roman or pagan or Muslim or all of these other things, and they will have different attributes that they value. In our campaign, Alan Barr played a Viking who was over, from Denmark, I believe it was, and he had joined one of the Salisbury Knights, and he was, following Lord Roderick, but he was still a pagan, and so he had all these things, and one of his religious attributes was proud, because he was, they're a very proud people, and so if all of your religious traits are at least 16, then you gain a religious bonus, which adds a bunch of extra neat things that you can do. This whole thing is wonderful. The way that the traits work, the way that the passions work. These directed traits are interesting because they're variable. You can gain them through different things. Most of you start with suspicious of Silchester because of the way the campaign functions. But you can gain other directed traits. And what that is something that will just add to your roll. Okay? So if you are going to be, say a knight shows up at your manor and you need to give him something, okay, because you're very hospitable. How much you give him, well, check your generosity. And then you say, well, I'm 13, generous, so I'd probably be fairly generous with this guy at my house. But what if he is a knight of Silchester? Well, then you would modify that by 8. And so your generous would go down to 5, and your selfish would go up to 15 because you're very suspicious of this guy. And you don't know if you can trust this person because they're from Silchester. And so I can't say enough about the way the traits and the passions work in this game to create a character and then to create a tone for the game. Over the course of a game, you are unlikely to get into a ton of one-on-one combat. It absolutely does happen. There's monsters you have to fight. There's other knights you have to slay. That happens a lot. But the majority of the dice rolls you're going to be making are these, the personality traits and the passions, who you are and how you respond to situations, and how those traits can change over time is a big part of who you are as a character. You'll notice these have the same little check boxes. So sometimes these can help you, and it's if you crit, if I'm making that generosity roll and I crit, well then I might be more generous next time. But the way these work, if you fail at the one you're trying to roll, you have to roll on the other one. Okay? So I fail my generosity roll. Well, does that mean I have to act selfishly? We'll roll. If I fail the selfish roll, then I don't have to be selfish either. But if I crit that selfish roll, then maybe during the winter phase, my selfishness is going to go up. And so your personality can change over time as well. Again, this sounds from the outside kind of railroad-ish, as if the game is forcing you to play a certain way. And in a sense it is, but you have to see it in action. You have to try it for yourself because it feels cohesive. You still feel like you have total control over your character. If you fail that generosity and then you crit that selfish, then it's still up to you how that is going to come out in your play, how you are going to role play the fact that you just critically succeeded at a selfish roll. And then watching that kind of ripple effect off through future years of the campaign. Are other knights of Silchester going to suddenly be suspicious of you? How is that going to change when the rulers of the kingdom start doing their own thing and forcing you into a certain direction, and now you have to fight side by side with the Silchester knights? What's going to happen if you get into battle alongside one and you hate them so much and you're super selfish, but you need one to survive next to you? So there's just a lot of really great opportunities that this can do. Now, let's also look, go back to the core book here. Very quickly here at the end, you can see how this looks in practice. So this is an average knight, okay? They've got some sample character sheets in the back. And you'll end up with how this works, how your damage works. Here's all your skills. You usually don't end up with a ton of points in anything particular. This person chose as their signature skill temperate rather than indulgent. So they're very good at saying no to having too much wine at dinner and things like that. Compare that to the courtier. This one is their main thing is just as opposed to arbitrary is their signature trait. They have a ton of points in courtesy, which is a very important skill for a courtier, whereas this average knight, his courtesy is only 10. He's not super fantastic at that. But the courtier had to give up some awareness in order to get that. Come over here and compare that to hunting. His courtesy is all the way down at 3, but his first aid is pretty high, and his hunting is great. And all of these skills will come into play because not everything you do is going to be, let's go murder some bad guys. A lot of it will be, you need to visit the neighboring court. You need to go to this other little king and convince him to join Uther's high kingdom. And that might involve a couple of feasts. That might involve some hunting or some falconry just to build up a rapport with the guy. You're going to do a lot of time flirting because, like I said, marriage and having children, all of that is a core part of the game. And so being good at heraldry is incredibly vital. Playing an instrument can be super important. Oh, see, this one's pagan, and so his religious bonuses are going to be different. A fighter over here, his he's going to be totally different, and his signature ability is... Oh, reckless! Look at that. His signature ability is one of the quote-unquote negative ones, so he's reckless. Now, while we're talking about the game mechanics, the last thing that I want to mechanically show you is the battle system. Pendragon has an absolutely beautiful mass combat system. That's a thing that a lot of games kind of shoehorn into an extra supplement after the fact. With Pendragon, it's built in. And the way that it abstracts battles so that you can absolutely do a one-on-one skirmish with one knight or with a monster that you meet in the woods or something like that. But at least in our campaign, far more often than one-on-one combat, you're doing battle, which is a huge thing. A battle round takes an hour and an hour of in-world time, not your play time. The battle rounds are actually relatively quick because the system is very smooth. But a 6 or 7 round battle essentially takes all day for the characters because you line up, you get your lances, you charge in, you kill a bunch of footmen and maybe fight some other knights, and then you come back. The system is really great the way that it is designed because you have to figure out who your commanders are, what their battle skill is. There's a lot of modifiers based on how big is your army compared to their other army. Strategic considerations will give you modifiers. Do you outnumber each other? What is the terrain like? The very first round is likely to be a lance charge, and then subsequent rounds are probably just your group on horses trying to find other groups of knights on horses you can fight. And depending on how well you do in each round of a battle, you get to that will change how you're able to fight in the next round. Like, if the other side won, then you're on your back foot and you're kind of sort of retreating. You don't have the ability to choose your own fights. Whereas if you win and you destroy that little group of opponents that you were fighting, then in the next round, it's a lot more likely that you'll be able to choose your own targets and say, oh, there's the banner carrier, let's go after him. Or if you're incredibly lucky and incredibly skillful, maybe you can actually take down an enemy commander or something like that. And so there's all these modifiers. This looks like a lot of information, and it is, but once you learn it, the battle rounds go very quick, and they feel very tense and interesting, despite how abstract they are. It's really done. I keep using the word beautiful, but this is a beautiful game. The way everything is put together, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And then, of course, After the battle, you determine the victor, you determine some spoils, and how much glory you get. Everything in this game ultimately comes back to glory, because that, more than anything else, is what you can pass on to your children. Battle enemy tables. So if the enemy you're fighting is knights, then here's this table of what what kind of enemies are you likely to be facing, and all those other tables and battle round things that we looked at will give you benefits and modifiers and penalties to this, and that will tell you what the combat skill is, what the damage is, how it all works, and they've got one of those for footmen, for Saxons, for the Irish, for the Picts, and everything else. Game also has tournaments, so you can do jousting and things like that. Pendragon is an absolutely amazing game. I am being very effusive about this, but I warned you up front, it's one of my top 3 all-time role-playing games, and possibly my very favorite. Just talking about it right now really makes me want to play it. There are a ton of supplements for this. And so depending on how deep into it you want to go, there's a lot of extra stuff that you can get. The very first books, and over the course of the year, I hope to go into a lot of these in more detail. But just up front, if you say, that looks amazing, I want to go try that right now, I don't want to wait for his other reviews, the Great Pendragon Campaign. This big, giant book here, that's the first one I would grab. And then the Book of Knights and Ladies, which is the one that expands the character creation options significantly. Beyond that, there's an extra book about how to do manners, an extra book about how to do battles. There's a deck of cards that help you run feasts that's just incredibly fun to play with. There's so many. I keep saying so many. I just named 3. There's several dozen extra books that you can buy for this. Anyway, Pendragon, one of the most cleverly designed games I've ever seen. It replicates this feel of being a knight of the round table, even before the round table exists. This ability to be a professional warrior and then go through that campaign of, as the rise of chivalry, and then Guinevere shows up and love and romance becomes very important, and telling this whole sweeping epic, one of the great legends of England, of Europe in general, and being able to play through that whole thing with a game system that fits so perfectly and precisely into the mood and tone of the game. It's just a beautiful thing. So check it out. Play Pendragon. Play Pendragon. Give it a try. It's an incredible game. And you are incredible as well. Thank you for joining me, and I will talk to you later. Bye.